All right, guys, this is Mr. Naimatsu coming with you with the podcast slash screencast of the Unification of Germany. We're actually going to use not our notes, but this time Wikipedia. Wikipedia does a really good job of basically describing the unification very clearly. It also has hyperlinks for you. So on the TAC website, I've actually put this link in for you so that you can go ahead and click it, and you can go ahead and see it just like I see it, or you can even read further if you want to. So with that being said, guys, we're going to go through this introduction right now. The introduction kind of loses itself right here at the bottom, so I'm probably going to stop somewhere around here. But I'll be highlighting things. I'll be pointing things on here for you so that you can know. Before we begin, this kind of starts actually like, hey, they already got unified, and maybe it kind of goes backwards here. So it kind of starts from like at 1871, and then suddenly we're here at 1806. So it's kind of going backwards, unfortunately. So before we do that, I actually would like to go from the back down here and go forward before I get to this introduction. So there's a couple things I would like to talk about. First of all, we have to understand the influence of France on Germany. France for a long time, let's go ahead and pull up just a Europe map for you guys so that we know what we're talking about here. But historically in Europe, France consistently have had major issues with Germany. Remember at the very beginning of this year in the Renaissance, we had the Valois of France and the Habsburgs of Germany, and there was a Habsburg-Valois feud. That was in the 1400s. There were multiple wars that were fought. Then came a little thing called the Schmalkaldic League. It was a group of Protestant princes right here, and France, even though being Catholic, supported the princes who were largely Protestant because the Protestant princes were rebelling against the Catholic Holy Roman Empire. So once again, remember, this is an interesting moment in the wars of religion where the enemy of my enemy is actually my friend, and that's what France did in the Schmalkaldic League. During the 30 Years' War, we know that devastated Germany, the last really religious war, the one that ended in 1648. France sent multiple troops over here to destroy them. So we know that France and Germany have had quite a long-standing history of hatred towards each other. The biggest outcome to kind of update us to when Germany actually gets unified, we know that France invades Germany under the rule of Napoleon. Napoleon set up what he called client states, what we call alliances, and he put his family members, using nepotism, on all of these. One thing that he did is when he went into Germany, he called this place the Confederation of the Rhine. And when he did that, instead of being called the Holy Roman Empire with all these different little groups all around here, he said, you know what? You're all called the Confederation of the Rhine. And what France unfortunately did was actually increase or not unfortunately, if you're German, you're very, very happy. But what France unknowingly did, I guess would be a better way to say it, was they actually increased a sense of German nationalism. When you have a bunch of freaking French troops coming into your country, suddenly your differences between the Germans and hating each other as Germans is not nearly as big as hating a bunch of French people. To compare it to our country, if Canada were to invade us or Mexico were to invade us, I guarantee most Americans would stop worrying about being Democrats, stop worrying about being Republicans, stop being divided, and say, you know what, we're American, and let's go ahead and kick out the Canadians, or let's kick out the Mexicans from our country, the United States of America. That's what's happening in Germany. When France invades Germany, Germany's like, you know what? I may not like my fellow German, I may not like another German, but you know what I do not like is I don't like the French. And they begin to unify with a kind of a hatred towards French. Another thing that France did is they kind of allowed them to kind of like linguistically keep their own language. And that's going to be another thing. So Germans are going to say, you know what? One thing that we believe is we should not be owned by France. Another thing that we believe is that we all speak German. And then from that conversation of speaking German, they basically found out that they have a lot of similar customs, similar laws, similar views of their culture. Despite the similarities, there is one major issue. The northern part of Germany is Protestant. The southern part is a Catholic, and that's going to be a major issue that multiple German leaders are going to have to deal with. That is going to be a dividing issue between the Catholics of the South and the Germans the Protestants of the North. We already know that the more further north, usually more Protestant you become. The further south, the more Catholic you come. I mean, there's Italy right there. Also, remember that right here is the Austrian Empire, and there's Austria right there, and there's Hungary. We're going to talk about them a little bit later. But this whole area right here was called the Austrian Empire at this time, and they were largely Catholic. Remember that the Austrian Empire was owned by the Habsburgs. The Habsburgs were supposed to be in charge of Catholicism inside of their Holy Roman Empire and make sure everybody stayed Catholic. And so it makes sense that Austrian and the south of Germany would remain Catholic. So that's just a couple little heads up about what's kind of going on. There's one more thing that we need to know, which is another step towards unification. So if we had one step was France invading, causing these people to think that they should be unified at some level. Another thing that happens is in the revolutions of 1848 in Frankfurt. There's a capital city right here in Frankfurt. And in 1848, what happened is representatives tried to create a unified country with a unified constitution. So remember that we have Prussia up here. We have Austria down here. And in the middle, all around here, and I'll show you guys that in another map in a second, all around here are about 30 different independent states. So Prussia sent a representative, Austria sent a representative, and there are like 29, 30 other representatives here. And they all were trying to decide on what a constitution might look like. Unfortunately, they kind of failed. First of all, they weren't liberal enough. They weren't demanding the Constitution enough. They weren't excited to kind of unite all these different groups together. That was a major issue. And also, kind of Prussia wanted things for only Prussia. Austria wanted things for Austria. The 30 independent states still kind of only wanted their stuff for 30. So they weren't nearly as unified. And so that was a major reason why the Frankfurt Assembly fails, which happens after the Revolution of 1848. So what happens because it fails? Now we have basically two countries. We have Prussia up here. We have Austria down here in 30 states. Well, Prussia and Austria, we know, are the big players. And we know that Austria, for a long time under the age of Metternich, has been quite strong here. But Prussia is ready to flex its muscle as well. And it's going to flex its muscle under the leadership of a new king and also a new prime minister. But that's part of our next step. So just want to give you a heads up on that. Right now, I'm going to go back and I'm going to go ahead and show you guys kind of the different, kingdoms that were all over that area. But yeah, this kind of gives you kind of an idea. This is a map of the Holy Roman Empire in 1789, right before the fall of the Bastille in France, which starts the French Revolution. But you can see Austria, here's Habsburg lands, Habsburgs, here's Prussia, again, kind of salt and peppered, but here's all those 30 different independent kingdoms later that will go into the Frankfurt Assembly. Another thing that you want to look at, again, is language. Here you can see that language is largely Germanic. It's coming over here, so there's Germany right around here. And so there's that linguistic tie. And lastly, I guess this would actually be a better map. This is the boundaries of the German Confederation, which we're going to get to in a second. Prussia is blue. Austria is yellow. Here is the Confederation itself. So again, you can see Prussia actually has land outside of the Confederation, as does Austria. And here are the 30 different states that I talked about that all met in the Frankfurt Assembly and tried to figure this out. I'm actually going to redo what I said. I'm actually going to do the timeline and then we'll go back to the introduction. So on this timeline, guys, I hope that you guys take notes, and I hope that perhaps you're not only taking notes, but also you're drawing maybe a few pictures. I think this is a good way, and this is a beautiful way to understand the steps, is by understanding a timeline. So first of all, we've already talked about this guy, Napoleon Bonaparte. He comes France, and then he starts taking over all of Europe. One of the areas he takes over is the Germanic states. He basically takes over what we call the Holy Roman Empire, or the Germanic states, and he calls it the Confederation of the Rhine. So step number one, Napoleon has to take it over. He has to unify the Holy Roman Empire into the Confederation of the Rhine. And then after that, he has to make a lot of Germans angry that he is French taking them over, which he successfully does, causing them to increase their nationalism or belief in their own country. Francis I declares a new Austrian Empire in reaction to the French Empire, and really not that big a deal. But more importantly, once again, Napoleon creates the Confederation Rhine, and notice that this is a French client state. I mean, it's owned by France. So again, this is where a lot of the Germans start getting really angry about how they're treated by the French, and this is where the increase of nationalism begins. In 1806, Francis I, I think, abdicates. He abdicates as a Holy Roman Emperor. He does not abdicate as the Habsburg or Austrian emperor, but the Holy Roman Emperor, and this is actually the formal end of it. So in 1815, we should know that date, is the Congress of Vienna, as it says right here. The Congress of Vienna, looks at the Holy Roman Empire, looks at the Germanic Confederation, and goes, you know what? We're going to create a German Confederation, and since my name is Metternich and I'm in charge of this party, I'm going to be in charge of this whole Germanic Confederation. So that's what happens here. We kind of created now in this Germanic Confederation with something called German dualism. And dualism means two, right? To have a duel is usually a fight between two people. And if you would have guessed it, who are the two strongest powers in Germany? You should have guessed the Prussian Empire and the Austrian Empire. So both of those are the two German dual kingdoms, basically, trying to fight for control. In 1819, under the basically rule of Metternich, who is a conservative, the Carlsbad Decrees are created. And what the Carlsbad Decrees did is it kind of stopped a lot of nationalism happening. Remember that Austria is very multinational. So if Metternich, the leader of Austria, allows everybody to have their own little country, including in Germany, well, then his empire is going to fall apart because his empire is full of like 30 different nationalities that all want their own different country. So imagine that big yellow, let's go back over here to the Austrian Empire. Imagine this big yellow thing being broken up into 30 different countries, because if he allows Germans to have their own little country up here, then why can't he allow all these other people to have their own little countries? So with that being said, what they do in 1819 is creates the Carlsbad Decrees. And this basically says, hey, if you're a student, if you're a liberal leader, if you're a nationalist, you cannot publicly say, I want my own country, or I want to start a revolt, or I want a revolution. So because of that, a lot of the unification is put down. But Prussia, and we've already talked about that, creates a customs union. And that customs union was called the Zollverein. And here's the Zollverein right here. What they do is they create like a free trade system. They create kind of a unified currency. And because of that, now we're starting to unify, maybe not politically, but economically. We're starting to trade things with our partners in Germany. Germans are trading with Germans. They're starting to use similar currency. We're starting to see things unify. So although it's put down politically in 1819, Prussia kind of continues this economically unification, especially with the Zollverein. In 1848, like I had talked about earlier, there's multiple revolts that happen all across Europe. This is where we get when Paris sneezes, Europe catches a cold, starting in 1830 and continuing in 1848. And so these German Confederation, there's multiple ones. There's Berlin, there's Dresden, there's Frankfurt, and King Frederick William IV, these kind of forces them to grant a constitutional confederation. He sets a constitution, but once again, like I said earlier, the Frankfurt Parliament largely fails, or the Frankfurt Assembly largely fails. Again, they're not liberal enough, they're not revolutionary enough, and they're kind of tied more to their states than creating a unified Germany. So it's a little step that they create a political unit, but the political unit called the Frankfurt Parliament or Frankfurt Assembly largely fails. So what has succeeded? The economic accidentally pressed that. The economic unification, but again, a big step towards political unification, but not fully complete. In 1861 to 62, King William I becomes the King of Prussia, and he appoints this guy, Otto von Bismarck. Otto von Bismarck is a Junker, and you should know that a Junker is a nobleman. He's grown up as an elite. He's grown up under warfare, and he's also grown up during the Industrial Revolution. And he's putting these three ideas together, and he goes, I know what to do. We need to industrialize. After we industrialize, we need to go ahead and use warfare and use realism. And this is where we get that word realism that you took notes on, or realpolitik. He basically said this: let's do anything that we can do to make our country strong. If we have to break alliances, let's break alliances. If we have to form alliances, let's form alliances. If that means forming alliances with my enemy, that's okay. And if you're beginning to think, oh my gosh, this guy sounds a lot like somebody called Niccolo Machiavelli, who wrote The Prince at the beginning of the era in the Renaissance, that is very true. Machiavelli is known as having kind of a sense of realism way earlier than Bismarck, almost 400 years before his Bismarck, right? Machiavelli writes in like 1450-ish, and here we are in 1862. He becomes the foreign minister and then later the prime minister. At this time, guys, kings and queens are actually hiring more educated individuals to help run their government as well. So, yes, I am the king. Yes, I am the queen. Yes, I am in charge of the government. However, I understand I may not be nearly as sophisticated and educated to make good decisions. So, I'm going to appoint some ministers. There might be the minister of labor or the minister of education or the minister of the foreign minister, which has to do with my deals with other countries. In this case, he was a prime minister, which is basically, it's like a king with a president. The prime minister was kind of the president. So just as a heads up, right now in Germany, we call them chancellors. All right. And there's also a prime minister of Britain, even though they have a queen of Britain. So just as a heads up, the prime minister is basically a president making a lot of decisions for its country. So with that being said, Bismarck takes the throne and he is going to pursue blood and iron. What's blood? Warfare. What's iron? He is going to industrialize Germany. We have talked about the Industrial Revolution mainly in England. Maybe we've talked about maybe in France or something like that. But what happens between this time, between 1848, 1850, and basically 1870, during this time, the increase of coal and iron, which are the most necessary components for the Industrial Revolution, increases almost 6 or 7-fold in Germany. France and Britain actually lag behind. Germany actually passes them up in the amount of steel, iron, and coal that they produce. So just as a heads up, this is what he's going to use. He's going to use the Industrial Revolution. He's going to modernize modernize his army, use different weaponry, and use that army to go ahead and use blood and warfare to unify Germany. So that's what it says. And this is what he's very famous for. He's famous for using a blood and iron policy to create a united Germany. That's what Bismarck is known. He's known for 2 things. He's known for being realpolitik, do everything you can to make your country strong. I don't care if you have to lie, cheat, steal, doesn't matter. And the second thing is this, that he is going to use blood and iron to unify his Germany. So those are, if you need to know Bismarck, those are the 2 most important things. In 1864, he starts a Danish-Prussian War. Was actually started by Prussia. Denmark, kind of invades Schleswig and puts it in the Kingdom of Denmark. The Austrian Empire, Bismarck being very, very smart, who now has become the Chancellor or Prime Minister of Prussia, says, dude, how can we allow this to happen, Austria? This is the Germanic Confederation. This is for Germany. And we just had a bunch of Danish people from Denmark come over and take out Schleswig. How can this happen? And you got to come up and you got to help me and take out the Danes. And Austria's like, heck yeah, this is Germany for Germans, even though I'm Austrian. That doesn't make any sense, but I'm going to support you, Germany. And he does. So Austria comes up, supports Germany against Denmark, and to go ahead and get Schleswig. The Austrians and the Prussians win. The northern part is going to be given to Prussia. The southern part, Holstein, is going to be given by Austria per the Treaty of Vienna. So Austria and Prussia team up against Denmark, and they win. Later, Bismarck says, you know what? In that place that we just called Schleswig, that place that we just won, I'm accusing you of causing some problems, man. You're causing some issues. And he just makes things up. He says, I feel threatened by you. And so Bismarck invades Austrian Holstein and takes the entire state. What was split, he says, no, now it's all mine. Austria goes, how can you do that? We were just friends and we just split this up. So Austria declares a war on Prussia. And really, Bismarck wanted Austria to declare war. Bismarck at this time, after winning the first war against Denmark, goes, you know what? My country, my army is strong enough to kick Austria out of the entire Germanic Confederation. This is my chance. And he does. So they fight the Austro-Prussian War, also known as the 7 Weeks' War. And Austria is very quickly defeated by the more modern, more industrial, more sophisticated Prussian army. The Treaty of Prague says, you know what? There's no such thing as the Germanic Confederation. Sorry about that. I'll go back right now. So there is no such thing as the Germanic Confederation. We are going to now call us the North German Confederation. So let's do this right. Under Napoleon, we call it Confederation of the Rhine. Under Austria and the Age of Metternich, we're going to call it the Germanic Confederation. When Bismarck kicks out Austria and kicks out Metternich, it is now called the North German Confederation. And that makes sense because obviously Austria is in the south. So this includes all German states except for the pro-French states, which is going to be an issue. He's very concerned that there's a bunch of French pro-French states in his country still, and this is Bismarck that's concerned, and these southern kingdoms. And these southern kingdoms are probably more allied to Austria than they would be to Prussia. So then something crazy happens, and this is something he's very, very famous for. The French Emperor Napoleon II demands territories of the Rhineland in return for his neutrality amid the Austro-Prussian War. During the Austro-Prussian War, Napoleon contacted Bismarck and said, "Hey, Bismarck, looks like this is a great opportunity for me to destroy you." And Bismarck's like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa! I'm warring on Austria right now. Hey, let's make a deal. If you don't come and invade me, we'll give you some stuff." And so Napoleon goes, "Well, I want the Rhineland." And Bismarck basically uses this Ems telegram. The Ems telegram is created, and it basically, you have to kind of read it. It's a very interesting point, but it basically is calling out the fact that it was a private dispatch between a German to a French, and the German was basically, where the French was calling out the Germans a little bit, and then Bismarck rewrites the Ems telegram basically to make the French look like they are weak, they are not ready to fight, and they're not ready to take on the Prussians for this area called the Rhineland. So basically, and this is publicized, it's put on all the newspapers. We have newspapers at this time, and all of Europe sees this newspaper, and Napoleon III wakes up one morning, sees this, and goes, "What? I didn't say that. I didn't say that we were weak. Nobody in my government would ever say that we're weak and that we're strong. My name's Napoleon III. I'm an emperor, for God's sakes." And so because of that, basically Bismarck plays on Napoleon's, I don't know, arrogance, his elitism of himself, and basically pisses off Napoleon so much that Napoleon is forced kind of to declare war. And that's exactly what Bismarck wanted. So now we got the Franco-Prussian War against France. So the Franco-Prussian War ended with Prussian troops capturing Paris. So did Napoleon win? No. Did Bismarck win? Absolutely. Did Bismarck know he was going to win? Absolutely. And that's why he rewrote this Ems telegram and put it on the newspapers for all of Europe to see, basically making France look very weak and look very vulnerable. So he knew that. So he fights, and the Prussian troops capture Paris. The Second French Empire, we get rid of, I believe, Napoleon III. Yeah, that's where it is. So Napoleon III, it kind of gets gone. But anyways, going back over here, Napoleon III declares war. The Franco-Prussia wins. The capital, the Second French Empire, is taken out. Bavaria, Baden, and Württemberg are incorporated in the North Germanic Confederation. So these are those areas right here, the pro-French and the southern kingdoms that he was concerned about. He gets those with the Treaty of Frankfurt. Bismarck then proclaims King William I, now Kaiser, as the leader of the new United Germany. And they create a government called the German Reich. So this is called the First Reich. And then we're going to have many Reichs. The Adolf Hitler will be in charge of the Third Reich. So this is the unification of Germany. What are its main deals? Just to cover over. One, Napoleon for sure started people to think of them as Germans as being nationalistic. Second, although there were some opportunities to go ahead and do some political unification at the time because of a lot of issues, mainly it being decentralized, mainly people more focused on their kingdoms than a large Germany, they unify economically, but they do not unify politically. It is not until you have a realist called Bismarck, who is a prime minister of Prussia, that we begin using blood and iron. Bismarck, using the blood and iron policy, is going to make his army strong, and he's going to pursue warfare. He's going to fight 3 wars, once against the Danish, once against the Austrians, and once against the French. After that, he is able to kick all remaining enemies out and able to properly unify Germany, as you can see it here. So going back real quickly up to the introduction, hopefully this will cover some things. The unification of Germany into a politically and administratively integrated nation state officially occurred on the 18th of January, 1871 at the Versailles Palace in the Hall of Mirrors, France. Yep, the same Palace of Versailles that Louis XIV was at. They got princes of German states gathered to proclaim William I of Prussia, the German emperor, after the French capitulation in the Franco-Prussian War, which was that last war that we fought. All right, so I'm actually going to stop because I really think that I did a good job on explaining the history of Germany's unification. But again, here, all this stuff kind of gives you a little review of exactly what I was talking about. Here's that German dualism. There's the Congress of Vienna. There's the Zollverein. There's the French Revolutionary Wars, Napoleonic Wars I was talking about, European liberalism. That kind of helped out but wasn't organized enough. So there's a lot of information. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you can enjoy the unification of Germany, but I hope you understood all the little steps. It's kind of complex, but my little summary at the end hopefully helped you understand that the steps are not that huge, not that great. All right, and now we're seeing Germany. Now your next question you should think is this: now that Germany has been unified, what will be the effect on mainland Europe? That'll be our next step. We're going to see major effects on mainland Europe because of the unification of Germany. All right, till the next time, guys. Keep on studying.